Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So, since the Lions don't play until tomorrow night, figured we'd have a short 6-hour Dharma talk. Kidding. We will have a few sources to read from today. If you would, go ahead and please put your hands on Hapchang. We're going to start with a reading from the Sutta Nipata here. And if you're curious of what reading this is, it's easy to find because it's in the 5th book of the Khuddaka Nikaya, chapter 3, the Mahavagga, Sutta number 2, Padana Sutta, the Great Struggle. When resolved upon striving, I had gone to the Naranjara River. As I was meditating very strenuously to attain security from bondage, Namuchi approached me, speaking compassionate words. You are thin, pale, you're on the verge of death. 1,000 parts belong to death. 1 fraction of your life remains. Live, sir, life is better. While living, make merits. While you are living the spiritual life and performing the fire sacrifice, abundant merit is stored up. Why devote yourself to striving? Hard to travel is the path for striving, hard to practice, hard to achieve. Speaking these verses, Mara stood in the presence of the Buddha. When Mara had spoken in such a way, the Blessed One said this to him, Kinsman of the heedless, evil one, you have come here with a purpose. I do not have any need even for the slightest merit. It is fitting for Mara to speak to those who have need of merits. I have faith and energy too, and wisdom exists in me. When I am so resolute, why do you ask me to live? This wind might dry up even the streams of the rivers. So why, when I am resolute, should it not dry up my blood? When the blood is drying up, the bile and phlegm dry up. When my muscles are wasting away, my mind becomes even more serene, and my mindfulness and wisdom and concentration become more firm. While I am dwelling in such a way, I have experienced extreme pain, yet my mind does not turn to sensual pleasures. Behold the purity of the being. Sensual pleasures are your first army. The second is called discontent. Hunger and thirst are the third. The fourth is called craving. The fifth is dullness and drowsiness. The sixth is called cowardice. Doubt is your seventh. Your eighth, denigration and pride. Gain, praise, and honor and wrongfully obtained fame is ninth. The 10th is when one extols oneself and looks down at others. This is your army, Namuchi, the squadron of the Dark One. A weakling does not conquer it, but having conquered it, one gains bliss. I wear munja grass. Wretched would life be to me. It's better that I die in battle than live on defeated. Some ascetics and Brahmins engulfed here are no longer seen. They do not know the path by which the disciplined ones travel. Having seen the banner army all around and Mara with his vehicle ready, I will go out to meet him in battle. May he not dislodge me from my place. Though the world with its devas cannot overcome that army of yours, I will destroy it with wisdom, like a fresh clay bowl with a stone. Having gained mastery over my intention, and with mindfulness well established, I will wander from realm to realm, guiding many disciples. Heedful and resolute, those practitioners of my teaching, against your wishes, will go to the state where one does not sorrow. For 7 years I followed the Blessed One, trailing him step by step, but I have not found an opening in the Enlightened One, who is mindful. There was a crow that circled around a stone that looked like a lump of fat. Perhaps we'll find something tender here. Perhaps there may be something tasty. But finding nothing tasty there, the crow departed from that place. Just like the crow that attacked the stone, we leave Gautama disappointed. So much was he stricken with sorrow that his lute fell from his armpit. Thereupon that saddened spirit disappeared right on the spot. And so ends the reading. So as last night was the full moon, and Tuesday is Halloween. I thought I'd like to talk about the most famous of Buddhist demons, Mara. So normally, we only learn about Mara pretty briefly, usually in the context of the Buddha's enlightenment story in early December. We have that all-night sitting, and I'll share a few excerpts from that story later. This reading from the Bup Sutta that I just read is attributed to be the first occurrence of Mara in the Pali Canon. And Mara, what is Mara? Who is Mara? Mara is the Buddhist symbol of evil, a personification of temptation that entices us to stay attached to the world. It's also called the instigator of hindrances, master of disguise, of distortion and distraction. In the Digha Nikaya, another of the section of the Pali Canon, the Buddha tells the monks that he doesn't consider any power as difficult to conquer as the power of Mara. And the Buddha says, wherever there are bodily or sensual or mental formations, there is Mara. And Mara goes by a lot of names. You heard in the Padana Sutta there, another name for Mara, Namuchi. Namuchi means non-releaser, so one who literally will hold on and not let one go. There's a few other names that come about in the literature. Antaka means end maker. Kanha, dark one. Anipati, overlord. And Papima, or Papias, evil one. Mara, the word Mara itself, comes from the Sanskrit root that means die or death. And in the causative, he's usually referred to as the causer of death or a killer. So it's really interesting few names that this figure, this idea has been ascribed over Buddhist history. While I was preparing this, I came across a few interesting videos in my kind of reviewing everything online. And there's one series of videos in particular that's made by a man, Dr. Doug Smith from the Online Dharma Institute. And he's got a really wonderful explanation that he offers on his YouTube channel called Doug's Dharma, which I would recommend everybody check out. It's one of the best or better sources of Buddhist education online and puts things in really simple terms to understand. So when Doug is talking about in this video that Mara literally means to die, he also talks about how Mara could also be considered a god of fertility, in the sense that Mara's real drive and intent is to keep us passionately attached to the world and to continuously be reborn in samsara through birthing new passions, attachments, identities, egoistic concerns. But due to the natural laws of the three marks of existence, dukkha, anatta, and anicca, that dissatisfaction, non-self, and that everything is subject to change and is transient, that we're stuck in this endless cycle of death and rebirth as our passions and attachments inevitably change, fade, and get frustrated and die away. So as much as Mara is the killer and destroyer, and it's only because we're continuously caught up in this cycle of birthing new passions and things that we get enmeshed in. So it's an interesting kind of perspective there. The closest parallel in kind of Western thought and a lot of other thinkers and teachers and people have kind of made this correlation between Mara and the Christian devil, or Satan is sometimes a frame of reference used to try to understand what Mara is. But probably a better kind of analogy or comparison would be if you took Cupid and the Grim Reaper and put them together into one personality. In fact, there's some newer modern scholarship around doing a real deep dive in the history and thought around Mara that argue that this Mara-Satan equivalency actually fails when you go on a more nuanced level. So it's easy to make a simple kind of comparison between the two because that comparison is easy and pretty convenient, and without diving deep in, it makes sense. When one of the books I was reading to prepare for this, scholar Michael Nichols, in his book Malleable Mara, which just came out a few years ago, puts it this way. He says, if we generalize for a moment across Christian tradition, Satan has been characterized as a rebellious figure who attempts to undermine and pervert the good world created by God. For Buddhists, on the other hand, Mara is the world and stands as a representation of the conditioned existence that surrounds all beings. For Buddhists, resistance to the inclinations and forces Mara represents is not found in faith to a higher being, like as is in Christianity, which is thought to dispel the power of Satan, but rather in knowledge and greater insight into those very inclinations leading to their undoing. So I want to share with you a few of the short discourses from the Samyutta Nikaya. There's a whole chapter called the Mara Samyutta, which are connected discourses with Mara. There's actually 25 short discourses or episodes of dialogue between the Buddha and Mara. And I'm not going to read all 25 of them, but I'll just share a few excerpts from a few of these discourses here so you can kind of hear how the exchange goes, and it's kind of formulaic as it goes along. Actually, the first one in here is right after the Buddha reaches his awakening and enlightenment that you heard about in the Padana Sutta that I opened with. So this is right after the Buddha's enlightenment, and Mara returns again. So he's not vanquished for good. Mara, you'll see, he keeps popping up and up and up, right? So the Buddha is saying here, if you put your hands on Hapchang again here, I'll just read this first discourse. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Uruvela on the bank of the river Naranjara at the foot of the goatherd's banyan tree, just after he had become fully enlightened. Then, while the Blessed One was alone in seclusion, a reflection arose in his mind thus: I am indeed freed from that grueling asceticism. It is good indeed that I am freed from that useless, grueling asceticism. It is good, steady, and mindful. I have attained enlightenment. Then Mara, the evil one, having known with his own mind the reflection in the Blessed One's mind, approached the Blessed One and addressed him in verse. Having deviated from the austere practice by which men purify themselves, being impure, you think you're pure. You have missed the path to purity. Then the Blessed One, having understood, this is Mara, the evil one, replied to him in verses. Having known as useless any austerity aimed at the immortal state, that all such penances are futile, like oars and rudder on dry land, by developing the path to enlightenment, virtue, concentration, and wisdom, I have attained supreme purity. You're defeated, end maker. Then Mara, the evil one, realizing, the Blessed One knows me, the Fortunate One knows me, sad and disappointed, disappeared right there. So there's many, 24 more of these episodes in this chapter that follow the same kind of pattern. Mara appears before the Buddha, casts some kind of doubt or challenge onto him, The Buddha recognizes Mara, sees what he is, what he's trying to do, and says, no, you don't have power, and Mara disappears. In a way, as you read these, it can be kind of humorous or comical to see how foiled Mara is at every time. He never wins. He's always cast out and comes up with more and more trickery as he goes along. So a few of the other kinds of things that happen, Mara can also present himself in changed shapes, like a shapeshifter. So he can present himself as large, scary animals like an elephant or a snake, designed to try to frighten the Buddha. He'll also come and cast doubt in his mind, saying, no, you haven't, achieved awakening, you're still trapped. He'll come and scold the Buddha for being lazy as well. And there's lots of ways that Mara will try to distract and deter and cast doubt on the Buddha. And every time the Buddha recognizes Mara, sees him, and dispels him. Also, there's some interesting discourses in there where when the Buddha is teaching to the bhikkhus and the monks, and Mara will appear, sometimes shapeshift. In one episode, he comes as an ox that's threatening to run over and destroy all the monks' alms bowls and create this chaos to interrupt transmission of the Dharma. So there's quite a few interesting encounters and tales there, but again, Mara is always defeated. In the next chapter in the Samyutta Nikaya too, there's 10 discourses in the chapter of the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, where the female monks, the Bhikkhuni, also have encounters with Mara. And some of those are interesting too, in that the strategy Mara uses with the female monks is all, one of the strategies is to cast doubt on the capacity and potential that women have in terms of realizing truth and awakening. And again, the Bhikkhunis are advanced enough to dispel Mara and cast them away too. In fact, one of our common Bhikkhunis that we sometimes talk about, Kisa Gautami, the mother who had lost her child and went around searching for the mustard seeds and became a follower of the Buddha. She has an encounter with Mara too, that Mara comes back to her and says, you're mourning, you're grieving your dead son, and you want to basically get back with a man. And she says, nope, I'm on this path now, I'm good, and you can't come and try to exploit my grief and that loss. I'm committed, I'm on the path, and I'm a monk. So it's interesting to see her again as she has an encounter with Mara. So Mara takes on, has been later in Buddhist thought, in some of the commentaries in Abhidharma, Mara's conceptualized of having really 4 metaphorical forms. One is called Klesa Mara, and this is the embodiment of unskillful emotions such as greed, hatred, and delusion. So we can see how these, we can feel these, we can experience these can rise up in ourselves, and some of the Buddhist ancestors and scholars would say this is Mara kind of working internally within us. The second form is Mritu Mara, which just means Mara is death. So death itself, when you die, you can't further kind of progress and do your spiritual practices. So that would be a big obstacle and impediment to realization, is death itself. The third is called Skanda Mara, and this is a metaphor for the entirety of conditioned existence. So if you ever seen what's called the Bhava Chakra, the wheel of becoming, and you see this kind of image of the wheel of samsara that looks something like this, right? So you can see this kind of demonic figure over top of the wheel is a depiction of Mara himself, and he's got these fangs and claws that are gripping and holding on to the entire existence of samsara, and he's got a bunch of skulls on his crown and stuff like that. A pretty intimidating and scary figure. So that's another way Mara has been visualized. And then the fourth representation is called Devaputra Mara. And this is the Deva, the god form of Mara, what's oftentimes, and especially in early Buddhism, was thought to be a literal, real being who is the one that tried to prevent Gautama from attaining liberation from the cycle of rebirth on the night of the Buddha's enlightenment. And this is the most common portrayal in the mythic cycle, called the Mara Vijaya, which means victory over Mara. The defeat at Bodh Gaya just prior to awakening, the most famous story. So I'll share a part of that with you. If you haven't heard the story before, it's pretty colorful and illustrative in a way. So I'll just read about a page and a half from this, not the whole story here. But if you haven't heard this before, you may find it very, very colorful in some way. The prince believed that this was the time to subjugate Mara. He emitted the light of wisdom from the white curl on his forehead. Mara's palace rattled and shook, provoking great fear. Mara writhed in agony as if he had drunk poison. He then concocted a scheme to throw the mind of the prince into confusion. He dispatched 3 evil spirits and had them approach the prince. Their robes of fine silk were as light as feathers. Flowers adorned their hair beautifully. They were alluring. The 3 danced and sang gracefully and beautifully. They tried in every way to seduce the prince. They sang, spring comes, the sun's rays provide warmth, and young buds have sprouted. Oh, handsome lord, why do you abandon the pleasures of youth and seek enlightenment which lies far away? You do not look at us with our beauty, us with whom even ascetics who have retreated from this floating world have become infatuated. The prince spoke to the 3. He said, as the reward of your past karma, you now possess the bodies of celestial beings, but before long you will be assailed by the impermanence of aging and death. Your figures are captivating, but your minds are not true. It is as if a beautiful colored vase were filled with foul-smelling poison. Greed is the source of self-destruction. It is the cause of descent into the realm of evil. At those words, the 3 evil spirits at once lost their beauty and were transformed into wretched old crones. King Mara was incensed and immediately assembled 100,008,000 demons. He had them storm the base of the papala tree, firing their crossbows and brandishing their swords. Heaven and earth were enveloped in darkness, and the sound of the thunder was terrifying. Demons, evil spirits, and their cohorts, all with grotesque appearances, some with the heads of lions, bears, bulls, or horses, some with the heads of human beings and the bodies of snakes. These monsters with bared fangs and glittering claws spewed forth flames of poison, rained down all kinds of weapons, and advanced against the prince. This was the outbreak of the great battle between the great King Mara and the prince, the savior of this world. In the sky, 1,000 stars streaked by, black clouds swirled about, and the great earth and the great ocean, struck by typhoons, quivered like the petals of a flower. Tidal waves rolled across the great sea, and rivers rose up, leveling mountains on which ancient trees 1,000 years old had grown in abundance. The vibrations from the blows and the howls were truly terrifying. The whole world was covered over as with a black curtain. The sun lost its light, and the sky was filled with hordes of monsters. Pretty startling and scary imagery created there of just how dangerous Mara can be and how much fear and anxiety and terror Mara can provoke. Right? You heard in that telling of part of that story, Mara sent these 3 evil spirits. They're often regarded as Mara's daughters, identified, and their names are Tanha, Arati, and Raga, which mean thirst, discontentment, and greed. And sometimes, again, if you haven't seen what that looks like. That would be like his 3 daughters, beautiful daughters, kind of dancing around the Buddha, trying to tempt him. That he dispels them, and then the hordes of Mara's armies and monsters and beasts trying to attack the Buddha. So there's some interesting imagery that's come out of these stories and these legends here. Probably my favorite kind of sutra or story that features Mara comes out of the Mahayana tradition, out of the Vimalakirti Sutra, which is a later development. If you haven't heard of this character Vimalakirti before, Vimalakirti is presented as kind of the ideal enlightened lay practitioner. And besides the Buddha himself and another monk called Moggallana, Vimalakirti is the only person who can recognize Mara when Mara is in disguise or shapeshifted, which is kind of interesting. And the Vimalakirti Sutra itself is a very difficult sutra, but also very, very interesting and humorous in some ways too. So part of the Vimalakirti Sutra, Vimalakirti is presented as being sick, and the Buddha is dispatching bodhisattvas to pay Vimalakirti a visit at his home. But every monk or bodhisattva that the Buddha says, go visit Vimalakirti, go pay him a visit, they're like, I'm not competent enough. Vimalakirti, he's too advanced, he's too enlightened. I can't, console him or comfort him. So they're all kind of declining, saying, not me, right? And then the Buddha is about to dispatch another bodhisattva, go visit Vimalakirti, he's sick, and all the bodhisattvas offer recollection showing how advanced Vimalakirti is and how they're not worthy to go visit him. So one of the bodhisattvas tells a story of how he had been tempted by Mara, and Mara, again, had offered this bodhisattva 12,000 women servants, and was trying to tempt him, and the bodhisattva was standing his ground saying, no, I'm not going to be tempted by lust and all these things, and I'm on this path, and you're not going to influence me, Mara. Vimalakirti interjects. He says, I'll take him. And Mara's shocked. He's like, wait a minute, this is my strategy to try to tempt you and lure you. And Vimalakirti is demanding, so give me these women. And Mara's, confounded and baffled, right? So Mara kind of seeing maybe he's kind of lost, this. Kind of think of the Roadrunner and the Coyote, that kind of feud and antagonism, right? So Mara is trying to escape, trying to disappear, right? When Mara is seen, he's dispelled, he vanishes. But in this case, Mara can't escape. Vimalakirti has this psychic hold on Mara and doesn't let him escape. And what Vimalakirti does is actually preaches and converts all 12,000 women and transforms them into nuns and Buddhist missionaries, and sends them back to Mara's domain, right, to preach the Dharma and spread the Dharma. So I think that's a pretty funny story. Elsewhere in that Vimalakirti Sutra, Vimalakirti proclaims that all Maras are actually his servants, and then later posits a really radical new view from a non-dual perspective, a conception of Mara is actually a bodhisattva himself, one who aids others on their path to awakening, and that Mara, albeit undercover, playing a role as an evil one, is a display of skillful means of sorts. So this is a pretty shocking revelation, a really new idea in Buddhist thought that really antagonizes the concept of Mara presented in the Nikayas that I read from earlier. Right? And he goes another step further and also puts forth that the Bodhisattva path and the universality of Buddhahood by stating that even Mara is a Buddha. So kind of mind-blowing stuff when this is introduced, right? Another interesting account touting the power of the Mahayana can be found in the Chan tradition, or the Chinese Zen tradition. And there's two records or documents there that contain a story of Mara's conversion to Buddhism under the auspices of an advanced monk, which is also pretty interesting here. So cleverly, the Mahayana apologists defended these controverted claims that Mahayana sutras are the authentic teachings of the Buddha, because others would undoubtedly kind of doubt and criticize this and say it's heretical or something else like that, right? And the Mahayana apologists were pretty clever, and they said, if you're doubting this is the authentic words and teaching of the Buddha, then you're under the delusion of Mara, by trying to cast doubt on the legitimacy and authenticity of the Mahayana sutras. So Mara has also been leveraged and used as kind of a demonizing force too, even within the Buddhist world. In fact, the Nichiren, the Japanese 13th century founder of his own school based on the Lotus Sutra, also employed this demonizing tactic to criticize both the Pure Land schools and also the Zen school as well too, and saying that anyone that believes in the Nembutsu or the Amitabha chanting in Pure Land enters the worst hell, and if anyone believes in Zen, then that person becomes Mara. So he had a different take on some of the other schools, and that's another interesting history. But in our modern Western view, Mara is more likely to be interpreted as either like an archetype or an encapsulation and names for a collection of amorphous negative impulses or psychological states of mind. So again, metaphorically rather than a literal, tangible entity or person. But however you choose to interpret Mara can be instructive and serve as an aid on one's own spiritual journey. So for me, I'm more inclined to adopt the metaphorical and psychological interpretation rather than interpret Mara as a literal being. So perhaps the best takeaway this morning is to recall the Buddha's enumeration of Mara's armies that we started with in the Padana Sutra, the 10 temptations or ways Mara dispatches his armies that we ought to continuously be mindful of and combat through wisdom, insight, concentration, and meditative awareness. So the first step is to notice how these manifest in our lives and how they work to distract us or impede us on our practice. And again, to remind us of the 10, it's lust, discontent, hunger and thirst, craving, idleness or apathy, fear, doubt, hypocrisy, wrongly acquired fame, and then self-praise and putting others down. So I could think back this week and probably I was attacked in all these different ways, right? Even this morning, probably a few of them popped up. And this is because Mara, this concept of Mara's strategies and tactics in army, it's a ubiquitous staple of the world we live in our conditioned existence in samsara. It's ever present. It's like being a fish in water. These things are all around us, right? So while recognizing Mara may not always be easy, because again, Mara can sometimes be disguised and change shapes and forms and trick us in that way. But when we develop better meditative awareness, concentration, wisdom, and we really strengthen our practice, then I think we can realize when these armies of Mara are assaulting us, to be able to name them and dispel them and banish Mara by the same words the Buddha used. This is Mara, the evil one. I see you. Thank you so much.